The year is 2026. At least, that is what most of the world is seeing on their calendars. But travel to Ethiopia, open an Ethiopian calendar, and you will see something surprising. 2018. And it doesn't stop there. The Ethiopian calendar has 13 months. Its new year comes in September. Its months have a completely different set of names, and its way of counting the years is different from the calendar used internationally today. So how does this calendar work? Why does the Ethiopian calendar have 13 months? Why is the Ethiopian year 2018 while the Gregorian year is 2026? And where does this remarkable calendar tradition come from? Today, let's open the Ethiopian calendar and understand it. To understand Ethiopia's calendar, we first need to forget one assumption, that every country in the world has to number the years in exactly the same way. Calendars are systems humans created to organize time, and throughout history, different civilizations developed different ways of measuring and naming the passing of years. The Ethiopian calendar is one of those traditions. It is still used in Ethiopia today. You can see Ethiopian dates in everyday life, on documents, calendars, religious celebrations, public holidays, schools, businesses, and ordinary conversations. And once you understand its structure, it is actually quite simple. The Ethiopian calendar has 13 months. The first 12 have exactly 30 days each. Then comes the 13th month, Pagumen. That is where the Ethiopian calendar becomes especially interesting. Let's count them. The Ethiopian year begins with Meskerem, then Tikimt, Hidar, Tahas, Tir, Yekatit, Megabit, Miazia, Gimbot, Sene, Hamle, Nahase, and finally Pagumen. The first 12 months each contain exactly 30 days. That gives us 360 days. Then Pagumen completes the year. In a normal year, Pagumen has 5 days. In a leap year, it has 6. So the Ethiopian calendar contains either 365 or 366 days. This is one reason Ethiopia is famous for the phrase 13 months of sunshine. The 13 months are not a metaphor. They are literally part of the calendar. And Pagumen is perhaps the most unusual month for someone seeing the Ethiopian calendar for the first time. Imagine opening a calendar and reaching the end of the year. Instead of another 30-day month, you find a short month containing only 5 days. These days complete the Ethiopian year. And every 4 years, one additional day is added. That makes Pagumen 6 days during a leap year. So instead of having months of different lengths like the Gregorian calendar, Ethiopia keeps the first 12 months perfectly regular. 30 days, 30 days, 30 days, all the way to the 12th month. Then Pagumen finishes the year. Simple, regular, and distinctive. Now comes another major difference. When does the Ethiopian year begin? Not January. The Ethiopian New Year is called Enkutatash. It arrives around September 11th and in some years September 12th, according to the Gregorian calendar. This means that when much of the world is already several months into a new year, Ethiopia is approaching the end of its current Ethiopian year. Then comes Meskerem 1. A new Ethiopian year begins. Enkutatash is more than a date on the calendar. It's a cultural celebration. The rainy season is coming to an end. The landscape becomes green. The famous yellow Ade Abeba flowers appear. Families gather. Children sing. People visit friends and relatives. And Ethiopia welcomes a new year. So the Ethiopian New Year is not simply a different number. It is connected to Ethiopian culture, seasons, traditions, and history. Now we can answer the question that brought us here. Why does the Ethiopian calendar say 2018? The answer comes from the way different calendar traditions calculated the beginning of their year numbering. The Ethiopian calendar follows a tradition of calculating the year associated with the birth of Jesus differently from the Gregorian system. Because of that difference, Ethiopian year numbers are approximately 7 to 8 years behind the Gregorian year number. But the difference is not always exactly the same. There is an important reason. The Ethiopian New Year begins in September. So during the first part of a Gregorian year, the Ethiopian calendar is still using the previous Ethiopian year. For example, at the beginning of Gregorian 2026, Ethiopia is in Ethiopian 2018. Then, around September, Ethiopian year 2019 begins. This is why the difference can appear as 7 years at one point and 8 years at another. It is a result of two things: different year numbering and different New Year dates. But the Ethiopian calendar did not appear suddenly in modern Ethiopia. To understand it properly, we need to look much further back. Ethiopia has one of Africa's oldest continuous civilizations. The ancient kingdom of Aksum developed sophisticated systems of writing, trade, administration, religion, and timekeeping. Ethiopia's calendar tradition developed within a much wider history of ancient African, Near Eastern, Egyptian, and Christian traditions. This is also why you may notice similarities between the Ethiopian calendar and the Coptic calendar used in Egypt. They share important structural features. Both have 13 months. Both have 12 months of 30 days. Both have a short 13th month, and both have closely related leap year structures. But similarity does not mean that the Ethiopian calendar should simply be described as the Coptic calendar. The Ethiopian calendar has its own Ethiopian history, names, traditions, religious practices, and cultural life. It developed and was preserved within Ethiopia's own historical context. So when we look at the Ethiopian calendar today, we are looking at a living Ethiopian calendar tradition, not simply a copy of another country's calendar. One of the easiest ways to recognize the Ethiopian calendar is through its month names. Meskerem, Tikimt, Hidar, Tassas, Tir, Yekatit, Megabit, Miazia, Ginbot, Sene, Hamle, Nehase, Pagumen. These names are part of everyday Ethiopian language and culture. And because every Ethiopian month has its own position in the year, Ethiopians can talk about dates using these names naturally. For someone outside Ethiopia, it may sound unfamiliar at first, but after learning the 13 months, the system becomes surprisingly easy to follow. And there is another interesting feature. The Ethiopian months line up with the Gregorian calendar in a fairly predictable way. Meskerem begins around September, Tikimt around October, Hidar around November, and the cycle continues until Pagumen, which arrives before the next Ethiopian New Year. Today, Ethiopia exists in a world where international communication is extremely important. Flights use international dates. International businesses use Gregorian dates. Technology companies use Gregorian dates. But inside Ethiopia, the Ethiopian calendar remains deeply important. That means Ethiopians may encounter both systems in everyday life. A document may contain an Ethiopian date. An international website may display a Gregorian date. A holiday may be understood according to the Ethiopian calendar, and a foreign business may communicate using the Gregorian calendar. Understanding both systems can therefore be extremely useful. But the Ethiopian calendar remains an important part of Ethiopian identity and everyday life. What makes the Ethiopian calendar special? It survived into the modern age as a living calendar system. It has 13 months. It has a short final month. Its new year comes in September. Its year numbering follows a different historical tradition, and its names have become part of Ethiopian culture. For many people around the world, a calendar is something they simply look at to know the date. But in Ethiopia, the calendar can also be a doorway into history. It connects the present with centuries of Ethiopian tradition. It reminds us that the way we count time is not universal. Different civilizations have created different systems, and Ethiopia continues to use its own. So why does the world say 2026 while the Ethiopian calendar says 2018? Because Ethiopia has its own calendar tradition, a calendar with 13 months, a calendar with Pagumen, a calendar whose new year arrives in September, a calendar with its own names, history, and way of counting the years. And that's what makes the Ethiopian calendar so fascinating. It's not just a different date on a piece of paper. It's a part of Ethiopia's history that is still being used today. So the next time you see the number 2018 on an Ethiopian calendar, remember, behind that number is a whole system for understanding time. 13 months, one Ethiopian year, one living calendar tradition. This is AxumCode, and there is much more to discover about Ethiopia. See you in the next video.